It wasn't supposed to end this way. I had everything I could have ever wanted and more. I was born into wealth and power. My father was a planetary governor for Emperor's sake. And yet, I am nothing but a slave now. To think, he sold his one and only daughter to keep his position. I've since stopped wondering what kind of dealings he did with those strange people. After all, it's been 10 years that I've been stuck on this damn pleasure world. Pleasure? Yeah, right. Every day, I tried to escape. Luckily, they never beat me hard enough to leave markings and bruises. I was their merchandise, after all. I had to look appealing to the customers, those good-for-nothing liars. Every other customer would tell me that he'd buy me my freedom. To think that I actually believed them. After all those years working in the brothel, I fell into depression. I almost ended it, but then I met your father. He was rugged, yet handsome. A war hero who had single-handedly slain an ancient Xenos. He was nice to me, and he'd buy me out for a whole month's time so that no other person could buy me until his next visit. He loved me, and I him. But we could not be together. For how could a veteran guardsman marry a whore? It pained me at first, but then he gave me a gift. We found out I was pregnant with the two of you. I was so happy, I could hardly wait for our next reunion. But then a month passed, and he did not come. Surely he had other business to attend to, so I waited. Another month came and went, and still no word. My owners told me that his payments stopped coming in and that I would have to work again. But who would want to be with a pregnant woman expecting twins? There are too many sickos in this world, for I had more customers than before. But that doesn't matter. I'll soon be able to see you and your sister. Boom. The entire world felt like it was shaking. Boom. Boom. 2 more explosions rocked the building, shattering it apart. I turned to my customer to ask him for help. I was frozen in shock as his head had been smashed open by a large chunk of the ceiling above us. I clutched my stomach, and all I could think about was to get to safety. I made my way down the stairs of the crumbling brothel as screams drowned out my thoughts. Finally, I made it outside, only to see a world burning before me. The sky was orange as black clouds blotted out the sun. Smoke and fire swallowed the once peaceful and serene landscape. I saw a blur out of the corner of my eye. I turned to look, but a brick came flying at me. When I came to, I was in a room with 4 other girls. 2 of the customers had knives brandished at us and began telling us to strip down. Amy, the youngest of us, tried to run away. She didn't even get past the door. Her screams pierced my ears as their knives repeatedly entered her body. The worst part was that they didn't even stop once she was dead. They began to desecrate her body, but not before they cut her face off and threw it at us. This went on for what felt like a lifetime. Should I try and escape while they were focused on her? No, I shouldn't. I can't risk putting my children in danger. I looked over at Beatrice, who had just emptied her stomach at the grisly scene before us. And that's when I felt it. Footsteps. But these sounded so heavy. The pool of blood shook with every step until a metal giant stood at the doorway. Its silver hand reached over at one of the men and instantly popped his head like a grape. My vision began to blur, but before I lost consciousness, I saw the other man's life end as his top half was blown apart with a loud flash. As I was coming in and out of consciousness, I could feel my body being dragged across the floor. Then I was thrown into a cage filled with other people. We were loaded into a massive ship and dumped into a disgusting room. There must have been hundreds of us in here. I wondered what the floor was made of, since it was warm and soft. And then I saw a face. We were standing on the corpses of other people. I felt a sharp pain in my stomach. I was bleeding down my leg. My babies! I curled up into a ball and bawled my eyes out. What the fuck is going on? Where am I? What had I done to deserve this? Little did I know, it would only get worse from here. It could have been hours or days later. I don't know anymore. But that's when the giants came back. Clad in silver armor, they donned massive axes that roared with each swing. Pandemonium ensued as we all tried to flee from the massacre before us. Limbs, viscera, and waves of blood washed over us. I was lucky I wasn't trampled to death, or worse. Those of us who survived this culling were chained up in metal cages. It seemed that the men had only been targeted in the previous attack, for only women remained in these cages. This time, robed figures approached us. They stripped us down and began injecting us with vials upon vials of multicolored fluids. Over the next few hours, we experienced excruciating pain. My insides felt like they were on fire. Some of the women started convulsing or vomiting out their insides. I wish I could have died there, saved you from the suffering anymore. When the robed men came back, they took the few of us that were still alive into some facility. We were taken 2 by 2 into separate rooms. I don't even know why I'm still talking to you. They took you away. They ripped you out of me. They took my babies. The shock was too much. I barely felt the stitching of the other woman onto me. I didn't even care anymore. Our insides were fused together. She and I became one. But without you, I was empty inside. But that's when I saw him. Your soon-to-be big brother. He was already old enough to be 12, maybe 13. But when he was placed inside of me, of us, we were family. I could feel them growing, getting stronger. The robed men appeared more often, and would chant hymns to their gods. It soothed him. I was sure of it. And then he was ready. The stitching tore as he tried to come out. It was unbearable, the pain, but I had to stay conscious. I had to see my boy. There was so much blood, and I felt my other half's life extinguishing. He rose and stood right in front of me. How beautiful he was. I could tell it was my time to go. My life was horrible, but I was just happy I could give birth.
My scanner picks up movement coming from the left. I relay this to the rest of my strike team, and we stealthily get into position, ready to unleash pulse fire on these barbarian Xenos. For how could they deny the greater good? They could have prospered under our rule, under the banner. However, they sealed their fates by assassinating ethereal Ka'Lar. All that awaits them now is death, and I will be the first to pull that trigger finger. Strike team, on my mark. But just then, the arachnid Xenos were ambushed by the Groot. Hold fire, I ordered my team. Looks like the scouts have this one. After the brief battle, I speak to the Groot Shaper, and we relay information gathered on these despicable Xenos. However, Xenos such as these arachnids should be burned, and yet I see the Groot engaging in their barbaric act of eating their slain enemy. Why eat such filth? But no matter, that shouldn't concern me. We finish laying out battle plans, and we ready ourselves for the next part of our attack. For we must continue heading deeper and deeper into the arachnid compound, hoping that the Guevesa unit is still alive. As we head on deeper, I notice that the walls are becoming thicker with webbing, and the air seems to be dense with a type of strange dust. Still, we continue on, and not long from them, blood drips from above me, and as I look up to see, it's a carcass of one of the arachnids. Seems like they too practice in cannibalism. No matter, but then, to my surprise, the corpse begins to shake. The lifeless body of the creature convulsed until black ichor began oozing from every orifice. I wipe it off of me as fast as I could, but my fire warriors tend to fire their pulse rounds right into it, making sure that it was truly dead. I tell them to hold fire, that they might give away our position. So young, so foolish, but still, they did the right thing. They're trying to protect me after all. They're Shazla. And yet, we continue onwards. However, from the back of our group, we hear vomiting. 2 of our fire warriors had fallen ill, so much so that once their stomachs emptied, they began to puke out blood. And then, they're bleeding from their eye sockets, and then something wriggles across their face. They're in me, Shazla! They're in me! How could my team get infected? They had kept their suits on this whole time. I turn behind me, and the entire crew team has also fallen ill. But somehow, for them it's worse. Much worse. For they have began to regurgitate all their internal organs. And then, they begin convulsing, just like the corpse did. Crack, crack. Their bones break from the inside, as furry arachnid limbs sprout from within the Groot's bodies. Just what the hell is going on? Was it the arachnid flesh that they ate? No matter, I must retreat before it's too late. It seems that I'm the only one that hasn't been infected. Shazla, please kill me, my fire warriors call out to me. However, fear has consumed me now. For what kind of horrors have I bore witness to? These type of things shouldn't exist. For what type of Xenos invades another's body? It pains me to leave them behind, but I have to warn my empire. The ethereals must know of this blasphemy. And so, I begin running. I run past my squad mates, for I know their lives are surely doomed. As I run towards the exit, it pains me to hear it, but I know it's come to that. The sound of their pulsed weaponry. These warriors chose to die as Tau, instead of to live on as inflected slaves to these filthy arachnid Xenos. I run faster now, heading towards the rendezvous point, but then I start to hear footsteps behind me. They're getting closer and closer, and as I turn around to see what it is, my assailant is actually the reanimated bodies of my team. Their bodies now mangled and torn, as arachnid limbs protrude from strange angles, come towards me. I hurl a photon grenade, hoping that it'll slow them down. The bright light and subsequent flashes reveal their grotesque and twisted forms to me even more. I run faster and faster, yet I can tell they're getting closer. I can now see the opening to the outside, but then a sharp pain courses through my body, and I stumble across the floor. No time to see what this pain was, for my fallen fire warriors are already a few feet away from me. There's nothing else I can do. I must attack. And so I fire pulse shot after shot, but this only slows them down. Why won't they die? Don't they feel pain? I focus my fire on their vitals, the heart, the brain, and still they continue. Just then, the infected Kroot spring forth from behind them, and they dig their chitinous claws deep into my legs, ripping out chunks of flesh. I try to scramble away, however my plasma grenade goes off. The ensuing explosion throws my mangled body across the room, as so does the Kroot. My vision is blurry as I attempt to stand. I instead fall straight down. It feels like my leg is missing, and to my surprise it actually is. Looks like this will be my grave. However, the half-blown apart bodies of the Kroot are also somehow still alive, and they are crawling towards me. I close my eyes and await the sweet embrace of death. Just then, I hear a heavy barrage of fire coming from behind me, and upon opening my eyes, 2 stealth suits have arrived, their burst cannons ripping apart the infected. They carry me back to the awaiting devilfish outside. However, I can feel myself slipping in and out of consciousness, puking out blood as I go on. I think to myself, I've been saved, but is it too late for me? As I lay on the bed of the devilfish, for within my body I feel it begin to rip apart. Something is in me.
On the planet of Arbor, in the Segmentum Ultima, the Imperium was ready to fight a desperate war against the planetary governor and what was assumed to be a rogue separatist group. The conflict began when the planet failed to send in their military tithes, when ambassadors to the Administratum failed to respond to astropathic messages about the issue. The Imperium sent in the Imperial Guard. Knowing that the Planetary Defense Force would put up some resistance, the Imperium expected a few skirmishes once they attempted to capture the key hive cities of the planet. Little did they know that the planetary governor had been fortifying the hive cities for the past couple years. Each hive city was enclosed in an indestructible cocoon-like structure, nothing that even the Adeptus Mechanicus had ever seen. When bombing runs on the large structure proved ineffective, guardsmen were sent in to find a kink along the outer border of the structure. The regiments were surprised to find no resistance from the inhabitants, not a single glimpse of movement outside of the hive cities. Many of the sergeants were expecting ambush attacks, and their men were ordered to be on high alert for any sudden surprise attack. Throughout the entire process, Guardsmen were on edge, waiting for the sound of gunfire to erupt at any moment, but there was complete silence. Then suddenly, to the surprise relief of everyone, the sound of gunfire. Units mobilized and sped towards the conflict. Vox communication went wild with inquiries of the situation. But just as quickly as the sound was heard, the commotion stopped. It was a case of friendly fire, as one unit mistook another for the enemy. An enemy that seemed nowhere to be found. As the first day came to a close, the night sky was lit up with flashes as the demolition teams detonated their charges along the edge of the structure, where the gates to the Hive City used to be. Guardsmen watched the impressive show as they settled into this extremely strange situation. They were trained to be prepared for the initial assault as the most bloody, but this was the exact opposite. Everyone felt that the enemy was watching and waiting for the right moment to attack. All they could do is sink in deeper into what seemed like a trap. Captains began to speculate about the situation. One claimed that the Eldar were the culprits behind this whole thing. He shared his story on the moon of Tamner, when an Eldar pirate ship disabled their space station. The Xeno scum watched as the entire crew hopelessly starved to death. Not a single shot was fired. They simply watched as one by one they died. Another captain pointed towards the ground. He explained he had heard of whole planets covered in underground cities. This could be one of them. The Separatists were counting on them to focus on the giant structures, only to come from underneath and kill them all. As the speculation continued, orders came to set up camp miles away from the Hive City. Each regiment was to bombard the structure with artillery fire every hour on the hour until the shell cracked. After a 5-day barrage campaign, the Imperium called down the Adeptus Mechanicus to use their arcane sorcery to scan the massive structure. Something this strong would be of extreme value to the Imperium, and only the tech priests would be able to validate such a discovery. Miraculously, the scans taken of the structure picked up sounds coming from within the Hive cities, the voices of billions of traders that inhabited the city. Quickly, the commander ordered the voices deciphered. These voices would shed light on the plot that was to unfold. The Adeptus Mechanicus worked on separating all of the gargled voices. The Imperial Guard watched as serval skull after serval skull buzzed around the enormous structure. They couldn't help but feel uneased by the tech priest's unusual appearance, their grotesque augmentations as alien as any spacefaring Xenos. After a while, the commander was called to the tech priest's tent, where the deciphering process was about to be complete. As the commander entered, he heard the voice, "Pomos nam, pomos nam." He stood over the tech priest as the voice continued on a loop. The commander could not understand. This was not a tongue he was familiar with. The tech priest explained that no one knew what language this was. It wasn't even a deviation from Low Gothic, like most planets tend to create. His team was running the voice through the Imperial language catalogs. The commander asks if that's why the voice was running in a loop. The tech priest shook his head. They weren't looping the voice. The person was simply repeating the same thing over and over again. "Pomos nam, pomos nam." As everyone in the tent stood listening to the eerie voice, a cogitator began to buzz, and the tech priest was able to pull up another voice. "Pomos nam, pomos nam." The same thing repeated over and over. The tech priest ordered his men to search through the garbled voices and find every time the phrase "pomos nam" was used. Within seconds, the cognitators began to ring with hundreds of hits. The commander asked if people inside the city were chanting the same phrase. The tech priest didn't believe so. If they were, there would be a rhythm to the massive jumble of voices, but there wasn't. "Pomos nam, pomos nam." The tech priest ordered the scans to stop on the city. They were to visit another structure. Perhaps things would get clearer if they gathered more data. The commander could do nothing more than to continue his attempted siege of the city. Eventually, the tech priest was able to decipher one more phrase. "Nisi nos." And much like the first, it was repeated over and over in an unidentified language. Days turned into weeks, and no progress of any kind. The commander began prepping his request for an orbital bombardment on the planet. Suddenly, A crack appeared down the side of one of the structures. The Imperial Guard rushed into action and bombarded the Legion with every warhead at their disposal. Like a giant eggshell, the structure began to crumble and fall. The smoke and debris sent up a giant cloud in the air. When the smoke cleared, the guardsmen were confronted by a gruesome image. An enormous conglomeration of flesh, hair, and bone, covering what used to be the Hive City, like a giant fleshy mold growing and pulsating on a mountain of metal. With no barrier to cover the city, the sound captured by the scanners could now be heard by everyone. The cries of millions of people as they moaned in agony. Millions of naked humans being conjoined at various points to one another. Some lifeless, others looking out towards the guardsmen in distress. A mucous membrane running through the entire mass like an acidic glue, fusing the bodies together, some of them women and children. Every guardsman stood in shock, unable to process the atrocity they saw before them. To everyone's horror, the blob began to move. What appeared to be two massive shoulders slowly gave rise to a humanoid head. The head turned its grotesque visage towards the guardsmen. The human bodies that made up the demon's skin squirmed as each movement brought them pain. With a hellish grin, the demon began to move towards the men. Fire rang out as ballistic missiles were launched towards the beast. The missiles that made their target left enormous holes in the monster. The creature's insides were also made up of human bodies. With every blast, hundreds of former city dwellers died. But their lives meant nothing to the guardsmen who only saw this demonic creature. The demon pulled his head back and then spit out a giant ball of mucus. As soon as the slime made contact with the guardsmen, it began to steam as it melted through flak armor and metal. Giant acid-spitting demons made up of living human bodies. They were all reported over the Vox communicators as the commander realized that all the hive cities on the planet were birthing these same demons. A total of 6 structures all cracked open and outpoured these behemoths from hell. Years earlier, the planetary governor had made a deal with a rogue psyker. In exchange for the psyker's freedom, he would gift the planetary governor 6 powerful elixirs, one for each one of his hive cities. These elixirs would allow the drinker to live 1,000,000 lives. Unbeknownst to the planetary governor, the psyker was possessed by a demon of Nurgle, and believing the elixirs would grant immortality to him and his family, the governor accepted. The psyker taught the governor how to create a sacred paper-thin cloth that was to be used to build giant canopies over each hive city. The demon instructed the governor that once the canopies were complete and the hive cities shielded from all light, each family member was to consume the elixir at a separate hive city. Upon consumption, the royal family fell over in pain as their skins began to peel. Horribly disfigured, the royal family members were sequestered in their rooms, afraid to show their disfigured skin. Servants began to report that the royal family began to secrete steam. Every time their chamber door was open, steam would roll out into the palaces. Soon each palace and each hive city was filled with a smog that was so thick servants could not see 5 feet in front of them. Embarrassed and ashamed, the planetary governor remained hidden in his palace. Eventually the steam began to roll out even further and get captured by the giant canopies that covered each city. Within 2 weeks, the hive cities were enveloped inside giant steam chambers. During this time, each individual who drank from the elixir began to hear voices. The voices told them they were dying and that the only way to live was to take the lives of their servants. These voices were Nurgle himself, and it was only a matter of time before every family member succumbed to Grandfather Nurgle's embrace. When the citizens began to attempt to pull down the canopy to release some of the steam, they realized it would not tear. Try as they might, the canopy was indestructible, and it soon began to harden. Communication from city to city became impossible, and astropathic signals never returned. Within a month, hysteria began to sink into the populace of each city. The population felt trapped in a giant steam-filled nightmare. An imperial noble gathered a small force of men to storm the governor's palace and take justice for the predicament. but what they found inside the palace horrified them. After breaking down the palace gates, the group was attacked by an abomination. It was the governor, who had fused himself with all of the servants inside his palace and was now controlling them like some sort of exoskeleton. It seemed that whenever the exoskeleton would make contact with any flesh, it would absorb it, sticking to the major body. Using the steam as his cover, the governor added human after human to his growing body. While each individual captured remained conscious and retained their senses, the captured were devoid of all voluntary movement. They were puppets to the royal family. What the Imperial Guard was fighting was the entire population of each hive city, controlled by the individual whom drank from the elixir. Battle against these creatures continued. Communication from the 129th Regiment ceased, and soon the 34th Regiment reported a second demon rushing their flanks. Within minutes, the 34th and the 129th were completely gone. Realizing that these demons were going to overrun his army, the commander ordered a full retreat into the transportation vehicles. As soon as he would make it back to his ship, the order to blow up the planet to hell would be made. The few ships ready to depart did so without hesitation. Unfortunately, they were struck out of the air by the demon's swinging arms. Escape from the planet would be almost impossible. Watching the transport ships crash down in a giant cloud of smoke, the tech priests in charge of deciphering the voices entered in a series of extreme evasive protocols into the minds of his drivers and launched into the air. The escaping tech priest was able to evade the swinging arms of the demon, but the demon leapt up into the air and caught the ship with its hands. The bodies scraped up against the ship door and tore one open. The bodies screamed as they shifted to fit inside the ship's corridors. A few servitors were caught and fused with the rolling mass of screaming human bodies as they pushed their way into the ship. The servitors turned on the crew and began to attack, now under the control of the demon. The tech priest ordered his pilots to ignite the thruster rockets to break free from the demon's grasp. Upon ignition, the demon's arms were sliced and the ship flew away. The remains of his body continued to fight on in the ship as more and more of the crew was captured by the demon. The tech priest realized that the demon was still a threat as it consumed more and more of his crew. He sealed the cockpit doors and ordered all other doors in the ship open. He was going to expose the demon to the harshness of space. Once the transport ship exited the planet's atmosphere, the demon slowed down and its body stopped screaming as the individual bodies froze. On the planet, the demon that was chasing the tech priest and whose arms were severed suddenly crashed down. It now appeared to be a gigantic mass of human remains stretched around what was once the Imperial Guard base. It seemed that whoever was controlling the demon was now dead, and along with his death, the control over the citizens was gone. A pile of human carcasses, covered in mucus, some still alive, was left for the retreating Imperial Guardsmen to witness. The poor souls would find the Emperor's mercy soon enough, as the commander's transport ship made it back to the fleet. The remaining 5 demons were obliterated by the orbital bombardment. The survivors were forever scarred by the grotesque experience, but they felt lucky to be alive. The bodies left frozen on the tech priest transport ship were taken in by the Inquisition for examination. They found that the body of the governor, who was controlling the giant mass, was never found. The planet was quarantined, and then simply wiped off Imperial maps and records. No one was to speak of the incident. The tech priest and commander were both turned away and disciplined for inquiring about the remains of the hard-shell structure left on the planet. The whole campaign would soon become a myth. And that was the creepypasta Cocoon.